මම ඒක ඉංග්‍රීසියෙන් කියනවා මේ ආම්දුරන්ට තේරෙන්න. We were talking about the word Satipatthana. Satipatthana means it comes from Sati Upatthana. Upa means inside. Sati is attention. Attention focused inside. I call it introversion of attention. So we withdraw our attention from what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch. And even from memories and from imagination of the future. We take our attention away from those things and then we focus our attention on what is going on inside, which is to focus our attention on the body, how the body feels, and the emotions that are aroused, and the thoughts in the mind. So that is the introspection. So Satipatthana is not mindfulness. Mindfulness is the wrong word. We are not trying to fill the mind. We are really trying to empty the mind. We are not trying to fill the mind. So it is not mindfulness at all. It is introspection or introversion of attention and observing what is inside. To observe what is going on inside. That is the meaning of Satipatthana. And when we observe what is going on inside, we begin to observe what is called how the mind becomes polluted. That means we start from perception. We see something, that is perception. We hear something, that is perception. That is vijnana. Vijnana is perception. It starts from vijnana, perception. And what is perceived is carried to the brain through the optic nerve or auditory nerve or olfactory nerve. These different nerves are like telephone wires carrying the message to the brain. And the brain begins to think and give meaning to what was seen or what was heard or what was smelled or what was tasted. And according to the meaning that is given and emotion is aroused. Emotion is aroused means the chitta now the normal Western psychologists, they have two terms to refer to the thinking mano and the emotional chitta. The mano is called cognition and chitta is called affection. The cognitive and the affective process, two processes. The cognitive process and the affective process. So when the emotion is excited, that is a disturbance of the affective process. That is the disturbance of the chitta. The disturbance of the chitta is called chitta vega. Chitta avega. Chitta vega is the disturbance of the process. And when the chitta is disturbed, that emotion is aroused and that emotion is expressed in action. And the action comes in the form of words or behavior. If you are angry, the action comes in the form of bad words and bad behavior. But as I said earlier, the human being has this ability to stop that action by making a decision whether to act in the angry way or to act in a better way. So that choice is what is called chetana. Chetana is the choice. That's why the Buddha said, Chetana ahang bhikkhave kammang vadam. That means what I call karma is the chetana, the decision. So it's very important to understand that. Now, when you do this introspection, you are able to observe this process. The introspection is to observe that process, because that process is going on unconsciously, without your knowledge. You don't even know what has happened. And it is because you don't know what has happened that you cannot control it. When you get angry, you are not doing it, it is happening to you. When you get a desire, you are not doing it, it is happening to you. When you are frightened, you are not doing it, it is happening to you. When you are worried, you are not doing it, it is happening to you. And it is happening unconsciously. That unconsciousness is what is called avidya. Avidya is unconsciousness. It is not the subconscious or the preconscious, it is avidya is unconsciousness. It is not even unconscious, it is unconsciousness. That is important to understand. So when we speak of avidya, we should understand that it is not ignorance, it is unconsciousness. So it is happening unconsciously. And by means of this introspection, we are becoming conscious of the unconscious process. We are becoming conscious of the unconscious process. That is the important thing. And when we become conscious of the unconscious process, the unconscious process stops. So the only way to stop the unconscious process is to become conscious of this. And this is what recently that man called Sigmund Freud discovered. His psychotherapy called psychoanalysis is really becoming conscious of the unconscious process. That is his method, but he didn't know about Satipatthana. So because he didn't know about Satipatthana, he was not able to eliminate these emotions really. He only thought of a way of dealing with the emotions, and that is what he called sublimation. Sublimation of emotional impulses. That is a different thing. He thought that was sending the energy of the emotion on rational channels instead of emotional channels. That is what he calls sublimation. So, but what the Buddha discovered was that before the emotion comes, there is this interpretation of the circumstances that happen outside. Because we are reacting to external circumstances. We are reacting to external circumstances. And we react because of the way we interpret our circumstances. So, that interpretation of the circumstance is what the Buddha called manasikara. Manasikara. Manasikara is the activity of mano. The activity of mano is manasikara. So, mano is the activity of the brain. It is the brain that thinks and interprets what was perceived. And according to that interpretation, the emotion is aroused. So if you want to stop the emotion, you have to stop the interpretation. Now when you begin to practice the Satipatthana, what happens is, you begin to see, because you are doing Kayanupassana, Vedananupassana, Chittanupassana and Dhammanupassana, you begin to realize that it is the interpretation that started the emotional arousal. When you begin to see that relationship between the interpretation and the emotion, then you begin to examine that interpretation. That is what is called Dhamma Vichaya. From Satipatthana, you enter Dhamma Vichaya. Dhamma Vichaya is examination of the interpretation. And when you examine the interpretation, you begin to realize that it is not necessarily a truth. That interpretation can be false. And in any case, if it arouses the emotion, the interpretation is not doing the right thing. Manasache paduttena bhasativa karotiva. That is why the Buddha says, Manasache paduttena bhasativa karotiva tato nam dukkhamang veti. Manasache pasannena bhasativa karotiva tato nam sukhamang veti. You begin to understand that according to the correct interpretation, you get happiness. If the interpretation is wrong, you become unhappy as a result. Not only you, you are even creating unhappiness to other people. So Dhamma Vichaya is to examine that interpretation. So when you have come to that conclusion, you have got the strength to get rid of the emotion. You know how to get rid of the emotion. Change the interpretation. Now, the modern kind of psychologist is called the cognitive psychologist. And they practice what is called cognitive therapy. And their method of trying to solve these psychological problems is to change that interpretation. That is their method. They have gone beyond Sigmund Freud, who thought that emotions cannot be got rid of. These people saw that emotions can be got rid of. That's the important thing to understand. Now that strength that you get by changing the interpretation, you get the strength to get rid of the emotion. You are now able to get rid of the emotion. That is what is called willpower. So the willpower is really not a strength of a will, it is your ability to change the interpretation. So that willpower is what is called virya. Virya. Sati, Dhamma, Vicha, virya. And when that virya comes, the next step is purity of mind. When the mind becomes purified, then the mind is happy. That happy mind is Preeti. Preeti refers to happiness of the mind. And when the mind is happy, the body relaxes. That relaxation of the body is called Passaddhi. Passaddhi is the relaxation of the muscles in the body. Passaddha kayo sukhang vediyati. When the body is relaxed, you begin to feel comfortable. So the mind is happy and the body is comfortable. Piti and sukha. And the chitta becomes tranquil. Tranquil means the stillness of the chitta. Chitta is not shaking anymore. And that is samadhi. In other words, there you have the Bojjangas, the 5 Bojjangas. Vitakka, Vichara, Piti, Sukha, Ekaggata. And so, that means you are in the first jhana. You have entered the first jhana. Due to the purity of mind. Your mind has become purified and you have entered the first jhana. Once you are in the first jhana, you go to the second jhana. And that is by giving up the thinking process, which is vitakka and vichara. Vitakka, vichara. Vichara means to question. Vitakka is to give an answer to the question. That is thinking. That is called conceptual thinking, forming a concept. So when the conceptual thinking stops, you are in the second jhana. Then you give up the preeti and you enter the third jhana. Then you give up the sukha and you enter the fourth jhana. And when you enter the fourth jhana, there is passaddhi. Not passaddhi. Upekka. Upekka ekaggata. Now, upekka is a very important term. Upa ikkati. Upa means inside. Ikkati means seeing. You are seeing the inside. What is the inside? Inside is simply what? The process of seeing, which I described earlier, dittincha anupagamma dassanena sampanno, which is looking not at the object seeing, but at the process of perception. That is the important thing to understand. So Upekkha is really looking at the process of perception. And the process of perception is what we call the Panchakhandha. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. I explained that earlier. Vedana is how you feel the sensation. And the sensation is the Sanya, which is if you look at with your eyes, what the colors you see is the Sanya. And out of the colors we begin to construct an image. And the image that you construct, that construction process is Sankhara. And then you begin to distinguish between one object and another object. That is Vijnana. So in other words, the Panchakhandha is a description of the process of perception. And it is that process of perception that we personalize and say, this is mine, this is my seeing, this is my liking, this is my hating, I hate. Now all that way, that is called Upadana. Upadana is to personalize. And once we personalize, we are creating a self out of it. A self that did not exist earlier now turns into a self. But when we create the self, we don't know what that self is. Because we created the self by personalizing. Mine. If you say this is mine, then there has to be an I. But where is that I, if you look? Ultimately you boil it down to the body. Body becomes the I. And when the body becomes the I, the birth of the body is my birth, the death of the body is my death, and the aging of the body is my aging. See? So you have created the suffering yourself by producing a self. It is only by getting rid of this upadana, personalizing. We have to stop personalizing. And the personalizing comes from tanha, the emotional reaction. So when the emotional reaction stops, everything stops. So when you have understood this properly, you awaken from the dream of existence. And that is what I call a paradigm shift. It is a shift from the idea of existence to the idea of impersonal experience. Impersonal experience means there is experience without a person who experiences. That is awakening from the dream of existence. And once you have awakened from the dream of existence, there is no more death for you. You have to exist before you can die. And if you don't exist, how can you die? So you are free from death. And there is no you to be free from death. And there is no you to die. That is what is called vimukti. Vimukti is freedom. And vimukti ends in nirvana, the unshakable state of tranquility. I call it the imperturbable serenity of mind. The imperturbable serenity of mind. Akuppa cheto vimukti. The akuppa cheto vimukti is the imperturbable serenity of mind. That is Nibbana. So the Bojjanga is the 7 steps in the process of awakening. The 7 steps in the process of awakening. So going through the 7 steps in the process of awakening is what is called Vedasatahana Bhavana. That is the Vedasatahana Bhavana. I hope you understood it.